The Medevac helicopter was already circling, rotors hammering the Colorado sky, but the gate was welded shut. A fresh weld sealed the chain, its rough beads still warm under the noonday sun. 3 weeks earlier, Jonathan Cole checked his windsock and the faded red cross painted on the concrete pad.
This pad saves lives. 22-minute radius, and not another authorized strip inside it.
You call that a helipad? It's a noise factory, and I am filing a complaint.
That pad has transported 17 critical patients this year. It's not optional.
By Tuesday, Brenda had typed a formal complaint, citing low-altitude disturbances and a void easement. The easement was granted for agricultural use, not for a commercial aviation operation.
She doesn't understand what she's doing. Without this pad, someone will die.
Jonathan filed his answer, citing the state trauma contract, but the noise committee had already voted. The HOA board convened Monday morning. Brenda presented noise logs and a petition signed by 12 neighbors.
These landings violate county noise statutes and the spirit of our rural community.
The board voted 6-0, forwarding the recommendation to the county. By Thursday, the commissioners signed the order. The easement is hereby declared void for non-conforming use. The access gate shall be permanently sealed. A county crew arrived with welding rigs and heavy chains. The gate came down in a glare of sparks.
They're sealing it. My pad is being locked away like a crime scene. I have to try the courts. An emergency injunction might override this.
He filed that afternoon. The judge, however, deferred to the HOA's legal standing. The motion was denied. No hearing, no temporary relief. The gate stayed welded. Jonathan stared at the denial order in his hand. The gate behind him remained sealed. Every path forward had been cut off. The next morning, Jonathan stood before the welded gate, the denial order still in his hand.
22 minutes. Without this pad, the nearest trauma center adds 14.
He called the county commissioner's office. The clerk recited the order and hung up. He tried his nearest neighbor. She refused to meet his eye and said the helicopter scared her horses.
They all think I am just a nuisance. They have no idea what this pad means.
Back inside, he pulled the original trauma contract from a worn folder. The paper yellowed. Level -1, Trauma Network Certified Landing Zone. Maintained by Jonathan Cole, retired EMS pilot.
17 critical patients last year. All of that means nothing to them.
He closed the folder. Outside, the wind stirred the windsock, but the gate stayed sealed. He knew a crisis was coming, and when it did, the welded gate would be judged by lives, not lawsuits. That Saturday, Brenda Calloway hosted a victory brunch at the clubhouse, raising a mimosa to the quiet skies.
Not another helicopter. The noise committee did its job. Peace and quiet from now on.
Her father, Harold, sat at a side table, prodding his eggs Benedict. He felt a flutter in his chest, but said nothing to spoil her mood.
That pilot thought he could park a chopper in our backyard. Not anymore.
My heart's been skipping beats for years. I know the signs. Today, it's just indigestion.
At his ranch, Jonathan drafted another appeal, knowing the courts moved slower than any emergency.
Every day, that gate stays sealed. The odds of a fatality tick up.
Through the window, he heard the distant thump of rotors. A Medevac helicopter crossed the ridge, but it couldn't land. Back at the clubhouse, Brenda ordered another round, laughing with her neighbors. The threat was over, she believed, and somewhere overhead, an invisible clock was already ticking toward a day when that pad would be the only chance. 3 weeks crawled by. Jonathan's emergency appeals dried up into dismissals, each one more final than the last. The judge's order was blunt. No constitutional violation, no stay. The gate would remain welded. Then a post surfaced on the HOA residence group with a photo of Jonathan's pickup and a caption beneath it. This pilot wants to crash his helicopter and blame the HOA. Keep your children away from his property. At the feed store, 3 neighbors he'd waved to for a decade suddenly found their shoes fascinating.
The silence is heavier than the welded chain. They've already convicted me.
He drove to the gate anyway, phone in hand, to photograph every inch of the sealed entrance. Each click of the shutter captured the weld bead, the padlock, the warning sign now facing inward.
These photos will matter when a life depends on this pad. And that day is coming.
But the community had already picked its villain. The pad didn't need friends, only a purpose. Jonathan pulled the trauma network map off the wall and called a retired EMS dispatcher. They drove to 4 possible alternative sites, the radar screen in his truck mapping the golden hour circle. The first was a rocky slope. The second was too close to power lines. Not even a helicopter could land there.
Not a single one within the 22-minute radius. The numbers don't lie.
Back at the ranch, the dispatcher's voice confirmed what he already knew. His pad was the only authorized landing zone.
Without this pad, a patient's golden hour becomes a 47-minute ambulance ride into a coin toss.
The golden hour clock on his wall kept ticking, its hands in accusation.
I just hope the next emergency isn't one that could have been saved by the pad they welded shut.
The gate stood silent, its chain holding back more than a helicopter. It held back the last chance. Somewhere beyond the ridge, an engine coughed. A helicopter passed without slowing. The clubhouse filled for the Saturday brunch, silverware clinking beneath chatter about golf scores and peaceful skies.
We finally got our peace. No more helicopters rattling the windows at dawn.
Harold Calloway sat by a corner window, rubbing his upper arm and telling the server it was just a cramp. Nothing to worry about.
It's just indigestion. That bacon never sits right. Don't fuss.
Daddy, you look pale. Have you taken your pills?
I am fine. I felt worse on the golf course. Don't make a scene.
She turned back to her group, laughing about the pilot who wouldn't bother anyone ever again. Harold pressed a napkin to his damp forehead, but no one at the brunch noticed. The bulletin board still pinned Brenda's noise complaint, framed like a trophy of small victories, and somewhere beyond the golf course, the helipad gate stayed welded, unmoved by the morning's fragile peace. Harold's face went gray. He pitched forward, clutching his chest, striking the floor before anyone could reach him.
Daddy, somebody call 911. He's not moving.
A server dialed 911, and the dispatcher's voice cut through the chaos in the clubhouse.
Cardiac arrest at Ridgeline Heights Clubhouse. Ground transport, ETA 47 minutes. Requesting medevac launch.
The helicopter lifted off within minutes, rotors tearing the quiet that Brenda had fought so hard to protect. The pilot radioed dispatch. The nearest authorized LZ was Jonathan Cole's ranch, the very pad the county had ordered welded shut. Dispatch note: pad, access gate is welded shut. Helicopter may not be able to refuel after landing. 11 minutes by air versus 47 by ground. The helicopter could still land, but it would be stranded. On the golden hour clock, the minute hand was already past the halfway mark. Every second now had a price. The welded gate held firm, and somewhere inside the clubhouse, Harold's pulse was fading. A paramedic pulled Brenda aside with grim news. The medevac's only authorized LZ was Jonathan Cole's ranch, the pad she had welded shut.
That's the pilot I complained about. The pad I had welded shut is my father's only chance?
She snatched her phone, fingers shaking as she scrolled for Jonathan's number. At the ranch, Jonathan stepped outside. The chopper's rotors were unmistakable, a medevac bird descending toward his pad.
That's a medevac bird locked onto my pad, but the gate's still welded shut.
His phone buzzed. Brenda Calloway's name flashed on the screen.
Jonathan, please. My father is dying. The helicopter needs your pad. I know I had it welded shut. I am begging you.
Jonathan didn't answer. The helicopter's shadow swept across the pad as he gripped the phone. The pilot circled, waiting for clearance that couldn't come while the chain held. Brenda's sobs crackled through the speaker, and somewhere under the rotors, the golden hour clock kept ticking.
Brenda, listen. The pad is under my contract. I'll authorize the landing. But that gate stops fuel. He can't take off again.
Just land him. Please. The ambulance is still 15 minutes away. He's dying.
Jonathan switched frequencies, his voice cutting across the cockpit speaker.
Medevac 1, this is Cole. You are cleared to land, but the gate stays welded. You won't be refueling. Understand?
The helicopter descended, rotors flattening the dry grass, kicking up a tornado of dust as it settled on the only spot left inside the perimeter. At the clubhouse, paramedics loaded Harold into the ambulance, his heartbeat a thin, reedy line on the monitor. Jonathan grabbed his keys and climbed into his old truck. He knew the back roads better than any GPS. He patched into the ambulance radio net, his voice calm but edged with iron. The ambulance raced east on County Road 4, sirens painting the hills red and blue. The helicopter sat useless behind the welded gate. The golden hour clock now read 42 minutes. 17 more miles to the intercept. Every second was a debt. Inside the ambulance, Harold's monitor spiked in arrhythmia, a jagged, angry line that turned the paramedic's knuckles white. Jonathan's voice came over the radio, steady as a landing vector. He talked the paramedic through a cardiac drug push. Brenda's number flashed again. She was sobbing, her words tangled with the wail of sirens.
I had that gate welded. I called you a lunatic. Now you are the only reason my father has a chance.
I am not doing this for you, Brenda. I am doing it because that contract says every life inside this radius is my responsibility.
The golden hour clock showed 51 minutes. The window had closed, but the ambulance was still 7 miles from the ER. Harold's pulse thinned to a flicker. The paramedic called for another round of epinephrine.
If he dies, they'll blame me. The gate, the delay, the posted lies. It'll all land on my name.
The ambulance swerved into the hospital bay, tires screeching. A crash team met the gurney, with a defibrillator already charged. Brenda stood frozen at the sliding doors, watching the gurney vanish down the corridor. The welded gate had stolen every second the helicopter could have saved. An hour later, the crash team's lead doctor walked into the waiting area, his scrubs still damp. Brenda straightened, her coral blazer limp. The doctor's words fell like a sentence. Harold survived, but the cardiac muscle damage was extensive, the result of a 41-minute delay in advanced care.
41 minutes. I welded that gate shut, and it nearly killed my father. Now he might never walk again.
I am filing a formal complaint with the state EMS and DOT, Brenda. Not for vengeance, so no other family stands in this corridor.
Jonathan walked out through the automatic doors, the weight of the decision pressing into his shoulders. Outside, the sky had turned the color of a bruise. He drove straight to the welded gate and stood before it in the fading light, phone camera in hand. The chain was just as he'd left it.
This time, the photos aren't just for evidence. They're the first page of a complaint that will force the state to act.
He drafted the complaint that night, attaching Brenda's original noise petition as Exhibit A, the very document that had started it all. In the morning, he sent the file to the state EMS authority and the Department of Transportation. The complaint triggered an automatic investigation. The welded gate, once a symbol of small-town quiet, was now an official crime scene awaiting investigators. By Tuesday, a state EMS investigator in a jacket with a gold badge stood beside the welded gate, photographing the bead from every angle. The DOT sent their own inspector 2 days later. She measured the setback, checked the fuel containment, and shook her head at the chain.
This pad isn't a hobby, it's under federal contract. That chain nearly cost a man his life.
The investigator wrote on a clipboard, obstruction of a critical care asset, potential violation of the Air Commerce and Safety Act. Inside the HOA boardroom, Brenda stood by the window, her back to the table. The other members avoided her eyes.
I filed in good faith. The easement language was ambiguous. How was I supposed to know it was critical?
A board member muttered that silence was safer, and Brenda swallowed hard. The motion to censure her was tabled, but the damage was done. Jonathan received the preliminary findings by email. The gate constituted a willful interference with air navigation under 49 U.S.C. Section 46,307.
They're going to rule the pad critical infrastructure. And when they do, the HOA's liability explodes.
The county commissioner who signed the original order issued a public apology, but the real consequences hadn't landed yet. The HOA's attorney contacted Jonathan with a settlement offer, full restoration of the pad's access, Brenda's resignation from all committees if he withdrew the state complaint.
They want me to sweep it under the rug, but if I accept, nothing changes for the next pilot who gets a gate welded on his pad.
Jonathan, please, if the state rules against us, the HOA will be ruined. My father's medical bills alone. I am begging you to take the deal.
I can't, Brenda. This isn't about your family anymore. It's about every family that lives inside a golden hour radius without a pad.
He rejected the offer that afternoon. By refusing, he chose to drag the HOA through public hearings and federal penalties, but it meant the truth would be on record.
This isn't revenge. It's the only way to guarantee no other gate ever locks a life-saving flight again.
2 days later, the state EMS investigator emailed a preliminary ruling. The pad would be declared a critical infrastructure asset, with statutory penalties to follow. At the clubhouse, Brenda packed her office into a banker's box, the noise committee plaques stacked on top. She didn't look up as neighbors walked past. The board scheduled an emergency session, but 2 members resigned before it even convened. The liability was too great to face. The gate still stood welded, but the chain was rusting. And on the other side, Jonathan was already measuring the pad for an extension. The state EMS office called with bad news. The HOA had filed a motion to delay the critical infrastructure ruling, citing procedural errors. The investigator sounded exhausted.
They're throwing every motion they can at the wall. Jonathan, it could be 6 months before the final order. 6 months. Another cardiac arrest could happen tomorrow. The pad has to be ready, ruling or no ruling.
He drove to the bank that afternoon and signed for a personal line of credit, enough to pour the extension concrete and install the new fuel farm. By Friday, a survey crew flagged the new perimeter. The extension would double the pad's capacity, turning it into a 2-bird station.
I don't care if the gate's still welded. When the order drops, this pad will be ready the same day.
Brenda visited Harold in the hospital. He was conscious but frail, attached to monitors that beeped with every shallow breath.
I heard what you did, Brenda. That pilot saved my life, and you locked him out.
I know, Daddy. I'm going to make it right, but it might already be too late.
The construction continued under the afternoon sun. Jonathan's credit line bleeding red, but the pad was growing, and so was the distance between him and any gratitude from the HOA. The state EMS investigator called again. The HOA's delay motion had been granted. The critical infrastructure ruling was now at least 4 months out.
4 months is a death sentence for anyone who needs this pad. I am done waiting on paperwork.
He called a local news station. By noon, a reporter stood at the welded gate as Jonathan pointed at the chain and spoke into a microphone. At the clubhouse, the news segment played on a wall-mounted screen. Brenda turned away as neighbors murmured, her face pale.
Daddy's therapist says every week of delay costs him mobility. I can't let the HOA stall anymore, even if it means testifying against them.
She drove to Jonathan's ranch, not to plead for herself, but to offer a deal. She would provide evidence against the HOA's board if he would drop the personal complaint against her.
Your testimony would help, Brenda, but I can't drop your case. The state needs to see that individuals are accountable too.
That evening, the bank called. His credit line was maxed. The first payment on the construction loan was due in 30 days. A new email from the state investigator. The judge had scheduled a hearing, but it was still 2 months off. 2 months of debt, 2 months of risk.
If I don't force a ruling now, the pad stays useless, and I lose the ranch. I have to file a federal lawsuit.
Jonathan spent the night drafting a federal complaint under the Air Commerce and Safety Act, naming the HOA board and Brenda Calloway as defendants.
If I lose this, the ranch is gone. But if I don't file, the pad stays dead, and so will the next patient.
The HOA board received the federal summons by courier. 3 members called their personal attorneys before lunch. Brenda was not among them.
Jonathan, I'll testify under oath that the board knew the easement was active. My father can't wait for another appeal.
At the hospital, Harold's cardiologist warned that his heart muscle was now too weak for surgery, and any further delay in care would leave him permanently bedridden.
Brenda, stop protecting that board. Tell the truth and live with it, or you'll watch me die with the lie.
The federal judge denied the HOA's motion to dismiss and ordered an expedited hearing, 10 days out. The case would be decided on the merits.
10 days. By then, my credit will be in default, but at least the truth will be on the record.
The bank sent a final notice, payment due in 7 days, or the foreclosure process would begin on the ranch. The welded gate stood silent, but the chain now carried 2 weights: a man's life and a man's land. The hearing could lift both or break them. The federal courtroom was silent except for the rustling of paper. Jonathan sat at the plaintiff's table, his flight jacket pressed and worn. The judge read her ruling without pause. The pad was a critical care asset under federal law. The HOA had engaged in willful interference, and Brenda Calloway's noise complaint had been knowingly false.
I was wrong. The board pressured me, but I signed the complaint. My father nearly died because I wanted silence.
The state's order landed the next morning. The helipad was declared critical infrastructure, its easement permanent and irrevocable. The HOA was fined $2.4 million in restoration and statutory penalties. A cashier's check for the full amount was delivered to the ranch by courier, along with a letter of apology from the county commissioner. Jonathan's credit line was cleared within the hour. Brenda stood at the HOA podium one last time, a handwritten resignation in her hand. The clubhouse was packed, and no one applauded. I resigned from the noise committee and the board, effective immediately. I will not ask forgiveness from a man I tried to destroy. Jonathan used the settlement funds to demolish the old gate and extend the pad. By summer, 2 Medevac helicopters could land side by side, and the fuel farm was fully operational. He never charged the community a cent. A sign on the new gate read, "Open to all emergencies." On a clear morning, Jonathan stood at the new pad as a helicopter lifted off, its medical crew waving. The golden hour had finally been returned to the people who needed it most. The news coverage made the federal ruling a statewide headline. HOA pays $2.4 million for welding shut Medevac Helipad. The DOT issued a statement. The coal pad is a protected critical care asset. Any interference will face federal prosecution. At the hospital, Harold was finally discharged. His heart was permanently weakened, but he insisted on one first stop, the helipad.
You saved my life, Jonathan. I don't expect your forgiveness, but I want you to know I am ashamed of what my daughter did.
Harold, I never blamed you. The gate is open now. That's what matters.
Jonathan received a letter from the Level -1 Trauma Network Director, officially reinstating the pad's certification with a commendation. Your steadfast dedication to the golden hour has saved lives and set a precedent for rural air medical access.
The pad never needed to be defended. It just needed to be opened.
On the day of the grand reopening, a Medevac helicopter landed with a critical patient. The crew, unaware of the battle, fought for that patch of concrete. Jonathan watched from the fence, the rotor wash pulling at his jacket. The pad was doing exactly what it was built for. The news crew returned to film the grand reopening, their cameras rolling as the county commissioner approached with a plaque. The commissioner read aloud from the new easement. This pad shall remain a critical care asset in perpetuity, protected from any private obstruction.
I never wanted a plaque. I just wanted the pad to be open when the next helicopter called.
The HOA's remaining board members watched from the perimeter fence, their presence unacknowledged. The fine had gutted their legal fund. Brenda stood alone, hugging her arms. She hadn't been invited, but she'd come anyway.
He saved my father, and I tried to destroy his work. I'll carry that for the rest of my life.
She turned away before anyone saw her cry. The noise committee chair was gone. Only a woman who understood the cost of silence remained. As dusk fell, the new gate remained open, a sign bolted to its frame. Medevac landing zone. Do not obstruct. The pad lights flickered on, bright and unblocked. The golden hour had a home again, and on the wind, the distant thump of rotors promised that the next call would not find a locked gate. The next morning, Jonathan sat on his porch with a cup of coffee, watching sunlight spill across the pad. The gate stood open. His old pickup sat by the fence, the EMS volunteer sticker still peeling. It hadn't moved since the hearing. A neighbor from the feed store, one who had turned away months ago, walked up the drive and stopped at the fence.
You don't need to explain. The gate's open now. If someone needs help, this pad will be here.
The neighbor nodded without a word. Apology hung in the quiet, but Jonathan just looked back at the pad. In the distance, the unmistakable thump of rotors grew louder. A Medevac helicopter was inbound, its landing lights blinking. The fuel truck was already parked beside the pad, hose connected. The extension meant no delays. As the helicopter lifted off again, its crew waved down at Jonathan. He didn't wave back, he just nodded, the way pilots do. The golden hour had found its home again, and Jonathan Cole was still its keeper, not by court order, but by choice. And for the first time in months, the only sound over the ridge was the steady beat of rotors and an open gate. The summer stretched long and quiet over the ranch. Jonathan spent his mornings maintaining the pad, listening for rotors that never failed to come. The sign on the gate still read, "Open to all emergencies," and not a single complaint had been filed since the state's order dropped.
It was never about noise. It was about time. Seconds a welded chain could steal.
And every time a helicopter landed, the clock reset. The golden hour was no longer a debt. It was a promise kept. Neighbors who once turned away now waved as they passed. The gate had become a landmark, not a wound.
I didn't need their gratitude. Just the open gate and the sound of rotors that proved it worked.
On a morning like any other, Jonathan stood by the pad as a Medevac bird lifted off, its red cross catching the first light. And for the first time in years, the sound of rotors brought no anger, only relief. It was the sound of seconds snatched back from the void.
This is why I built it. For every patient who needed those extra minutes.
The gate stayed open, and the golden hour never died again.